Courtroom 302 was a trap where a corrupt, racist judge weaponized his gavel to destroy an innocent black man's future. Drunk on absolute power, he thought his prejudiced verdict was final. He never realized a devastating real-life reckoning was waiting just on the other side of the heavy oak doors. The air conditioning in courtroom 302 of the Sullivan County Municipal Courthouse had been broken since Tuesday, leaving the sprawling room suffocatingly stagnant. Dust motes danced in the slanted shafts of afternoon sunlight that pierced through the tall, arched windows. For 24-year-old Desmond Hayes, the oppressive heat was nothing compared to the suffocating weight of the legal system bearing down on his shoulders. Desmond sat at the defense table, his hands folded neatly over a manila folder, dressed in his only tailored suit, a charcoal two-piece his father had bought him for his college graduation. He was an architectural drafting student, a young man who spent his evenings volunteering at the recreation center on 4th Street, entirely unaccustomed to the harsh, unforgiving glare of the criminal justice system. Beside him sat Sarah Jenkins, a public defender whose sharp intellect was often masked by the permanent bags under her eyes and the chaotic stack of case files threatening to topple over on her desk. She tapped her gold pen rhythmically against her legal pad, a nervous habit that betrayed her anxiety. They both knew who was presiding over the bench today: Judge Harrison Caldwell. Caldwell was a relic of a bygone era, a man who treated his courtroom like a personal fiefdom. At 62, he possessed a shock of stark white hair and a perpetually sour expression that deepened the heavy lines around his mouth. Among the legal community of Sullivan County, Caldwell's reputation was an open secret. He was notoriously harsh, particularly toward young minority men, cloaking his deep-seated prejudices in the respectable language of law and order and personal responsibility. Just 3 months prior, in the heavily scrutinized case of the State v. Arthur Pendleton, Caldwell had handed down an inexplicably brutal maximum sentence to a young black college student for a minor noise ordinance violation, a ruling that had drawn quiet condemnation but no formal reprimand from the Judicial Oversight Committee. Caldwell believed he was untouchable. "All rise," Bailiff Miller droned, his voice echoing off the dark mahogany walls as the side door opened. Judge Caldwell swept into the room, his black robes billowing slightly. He did not look at the gallery, nor did he look at the prosecution. His pale blue eyes locked immediately onto Desmond, narrowing with a microscopic but unmistakable glint of disdain. He took his seat, adjusting his microphone with a sharp squeak of feedback, before waving a dismissive hand. "Be seated," Caldwell barked. He flipped open the file on his desk, scarcely glancing at the pages. Docket number 44902. State of an alleged resisting arrest and disorderly conduct. Let's get through this quickly, people. I have a golf tee time at 4, and I have no patience for courtroom theatrics today. Sarah stood up, smoothing the front of her skirt. Your Honor, the defense is ready. However, we have a pending motion to dismiss based on the absolute lack of probable cause for the initial traffic stop. Caldwell sighed heavily, leaning back in his high leather chair and steepling his fingers. Miss Jenkins, I've read your motion. It's a beautifully typed piece of fiction. Denied. We are moving forward with this bench trial right now. The state may call its first witness. Desmond felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. The incident in question had occurred less than a month ago. He had been driving home from the library when Officer Thomas Finch, a rookie with a reputation for aggressive stops, pulled him over. The stated reason was a broken tail light, a tail light that Desmond had photographic proof was perfectly intact the morning of the arrest. When Desmond had politely asked for clarification regarding the stop, Finch had escalated the situation, shouting commands, unholstering his taser, and ultimately throwing Desmond against the hood of his sedan. The resisting arrest charge was a classic cover-up for excessive force, a secondary charge slapped on when the primary reason for the stop proved entirely baseless. Prosecutor Richard Blaine, an ambitious attorney who cared more about his conviction rate than the actual truth, stood up. The state calls Officer Thomas Finch. Your Honor. Finch swaggered into the courtroom. He was young, heavily muscled, and wore a look of smug satisfaction. As he took the stand and swore on the Bible, Desmond kept his gaze fixed straight ahead. He remembered the feeling of the hot metal of his car hood against his cheek, the sting of the handcuffs biting into his wrists, and the terrifying realization that compliance did not guarantee survival. Blaine began his direct examination, walking Finch through a highly sanitized version of the evening. Finch claimed Desmond was belligerent, erratic, and exhibited signs of aggression, buzzwords explicitly designed to justify his use of force. "And did the defendant comply with your lawful orders to exit the vehicle, Officer Finch?" Blaine asked, pacing slowly in front of the jury box, which sat empty for this bench trial. "No, sir," Finch lied, his voice steady. "He refused to provide his license and registration. When I attempted to detain him for his own safety and mine, he physically pushed back against me." "Thank you, officer. No further questions," Blaine said, returning to his seat. Sarah Jenkins approached the podium. She was a different person in cross-examination, sharp, focused, and relentless. "Officer Finch, you claim my client was belligerent, yet you failed to activate your body camera until after Mr. Hayes was already handcuffed on the ground. Why is that?" Finch shifted uncomfortably in his seat. It was a high-stress situation. Equipment malfunctions happen. I hit the button, but it didn't engage. "It didn't engage," Sarah repeated, letting the skepticism drip from her words. "Just as it didn't engage during 3 of your other traffic stops this month, according to internal affairs records." "Objection!" Blaine shouted. "Relevance." Sustained, Judge Caldwell snapped immediately, glaring at Sarah. "Miss Jenkins, do not attempt to drag this officer's record through the mud to save your client. Confine your questions to the night in question." "Your Honor, the officer's credibility is the entire crux of the state's case," Sarah pushed back, maintaining her professional composure. "I said sustained, counselor. Move on. Or sit down," Caldwell warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly register. Desmond clenched his jaw. He could see the structural prejudice of the room at work. The rules of evidence were being bent and weaponized to protect the officer and silence the defense. It wasn't a search for the truth. It was a coordinated procedural execution. The trial ground on for another grueling hour. Sarah meticulously dismantled Finch's timeline, pointing out the physical impossibilities of his narrative, and presenting the time-stamped photographs of Desmond's fully functional taillight taken by the impound lot just hours after the arrest. By all standard legal metrics, the state's case was crumbling. Reasonable doubt wasn't just present, it was practically neon lit. But Judge Harrison Caldwell was not bound by reasonable doubt. He was bound by his own twisted worldview. As Sarah concluded her cross-examination, she felt a glimmer of hope. "The defense rests, Your Honor. The state has completely failed to meet its burden of proof. We ask for an immediate acquittal." Caldwell did not look at the evidence files. He did not look at the photographs. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished mahogany of the bench, and fixed his gaze squarely on Desmond. The silence in the room stretched until it felt fragile, ready to shatter. "Mr. Hayes," Caldwell began, his tone dripping with a faux paternalistic condescension that made Sarah's blood run cold. "You sit there in your nice suit, looking very proper, but I've been on this bench for 28 years. I know how to look past the tailoring. I know what really goes on in the streets." Desmond met the judge's eyes. "I am a student, Your Honor. I was just driving home." "Don't interrupt me," Caldwell bellowed, slamming his hand flat against the desk. The sudden explosion of sound made the court reporter flinch. That is exactly the problem with you people. A complete and utter lack of respect for authority. You think the rules don't apply to you. You think you can mouth off to law enforcement, create a volatile situation, and then come crying to the courts claiming victimhood. Sarah shot up from her chair. "Your Honor, I object to the characterization of my client and the phrase, you people. It is highly inappropriate and shows blatant bias. Sit down, Miss Jenkins, or I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin, Caldwell threatened, his face flushing a mottled crimson. He turned his attention back to Desmond, discarding any remaining pretense of judicial impartiality. The mask was fully off. This court is sick and tired of this culture of defiance, Caldwell continued, his voice echoing in the stifling room. It's a generational rot. You young men run around our city, contributing nothing, steeped in an environment that glorifies rebellion, and then you expect a free pass when a dedicated police officer puts you in your place. I see it every single day. Fatherless households, lack of discipline, a complete disregard for the civil society the rest of us are trying to maintain. In the gallery, Desmond's father, Robert Hayes, a retired master sergeant in the Army who had been sitting quietly in the back row, gripped the wooden pew in front of him, his knuckles turning white. Desmond felt a flash of pure, unadulterated rage, but he forced himself to remain completely still. He knew that any reaction, any display of anger, would be weaponized against him as proof of the judge's racist stereotypes. Your Honor, my father is sitting right there, Desmond said, his voice quiet, steady, and devastatingly calm. I have never been arrested before. I am on the dean's list at the State University. I did not resist. I don't care about your little report card, boy, Caldwell spat, the derogatory term slipping from his lips with practiced ease. The word hung in the air, heavy and toxic. Even Prosecutor Blaine shifted uncomfortably, looking down at his legal pad. It was one thing to aggressively prosecute a case. It was another to witness a sitting judge use a racial slur from the bench. You can play the choir boy for your bleeding heart public defender, Caldwell continued, practically vibrating with indignation. But I see right through you. Officer Finch is a decorated public servant. If he says you resisted, you resisted. You think you can game the system? You think you can come into my courtroom and make a fool of the law? Your Honor, this is highly prejudicial, Sarah pleaded, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and fury. You are making a ruling based on personal animus, not the evidence presented. There is zero evidence of a crime here. The evidence is his attitude. The evidence is the disrespect he showed an officer of the law, Caldwell roared, grabbing his heavy wooden gavel. I don't need a jury to see what's right in front of my face. I am the finder of fact in this bench trial, and I find the defendant's entire demeanor to be evidence of guilt. We are not going to coddle this behavior anymore in Sullivan County. Caldwell stood up, towering over the bench. I am finding you guilty on all counts, Mr. Hayes, and I am not going to slap you on the wrist with probation. I am going to make an example out of you. I am sentencing you to the absolute maximum allowed by statute, 12 months in the county penitentiary to be served consecutively. Sarah gasped. A year in jail for a first-time, nonviolent misdemeanor where the primary charge was dismissed was unheard of. It wasn't justice. It was a lynching by gavel. It would ruin Desmond's education, his career, and his life. You can't do this, Sarah whispered, stunned by the sheer audacity of the corruption. I just did, Caldwell sneered, raising his gavel high into the air, ready to finalize the destruction of an innocent man's life. Court is ad. Before the wood could strike the sounding block, the heavy, brass-handled double doors at the back of the courtroom burst open with a resounding crash that shook the back wall. Every head in the room, including the furious judges, snapped toward the entrance. The sudden intrusion was so violent, so unexpected, that Bailiff Miller instinctually reached for his sidearm. Standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the bright fluorescent lights of the hallway, was a figure that made the blood drain entirely from Judge Harrison Caldwell's face. Heavy, measured footsteps echoed like a metronome of doom across the marble floor of courtroom 302. The figure stepping through the shattered threshold of the courtroom's tension wasn't a lost tourist or a confused witness. It was Chief Administrative Judge William H. Corrington of the State Supreme Court, a man whose reputation for uncompromising integrity was legendary across the state. Flanking him were two grim-faced individuals wearing dark windbreakers bearing the unmistakable, bold yellow letters, FBI. Behind them walked a woman holding a thick, leather-bound briefcase. She was Special Agent in Charge, Sarah Redding, from the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. Judge Harrison Caldwell's gavel hung suspended in the air, trembling slightly. The mottled red of his furious complexion drained away in an instant, replaced by a sickly, ashen gray. His mouth opened, but the booming, authoritarian voice that had just terrorized the room failed to materialize. "Put the gavel down, Harrison," Chief Judge Corrington said. His voice wasn't a shout, but it carried a deadly, quiet authority that commanded absolute obedience. It was the voice of a man who held the true power in the state's judicial hierarchy. Bailiff Miller, whose hand was still hovering near his holster, took one look at the federal agents and wisely took a massive step back, lacing his hands in front of him and staring fixedly at the floor. "William, what is the meaning of this?" Caldwell finally managed to sputter, his voice cracking. He awkwardly lowered the gavel, attempting to muster a shred of his former indignation. "I am in the middle of a bench trial. You have no jurisdiction to interrupt an active sentencing in my—" "This is no longer your courtroom, Harrison," Corrington interrupted, stepping through the swinging wooden gate that separated the gallery from the well of the court. He didn't even glance at the prosecutor. His eyes were locked onto Caldwell. "And as of 3 minutes ago, you no longer have an active docket in Sullivan County, or anywhere else in this state." Sarah Jenkins stood frozen at the defense table, her hand hovering over her legal pad. Beside her, Desmond Hayes let out a breath he felt he had been holding for a month. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but the oppressive, suffocating weight in the room had suddenly shifted. "You can't do this," Caldwell shouted, standing up and gripping the edges of his bench. "This is an outrage. I am an elected official. I am a superior court judge." "You are a disgrace to that robe," Special Agent Redding spoke up, stepping forward and opening her briefcase on the prosecution's table, completely ignoring the bewildered prosecutor Blaine, who had backed away as if the table were suddenly on fire. Redding pulled out a thick stack of documents and a small black digital audio recorder. "Judge Harrison Caldwell, you are the subject of a 2-year joint task force investigation by the FBI and the State Commission on Judicial Conduct. We have been monitoring your courtroom, your chambers, and your private bank accounts." Caldwell's eyes darted nervously around the room. "Monitoring? That's illegal. You can't wiretap a judge's chambers without a federal warrant."
"Oh, we have a warrant,"
Redding replied smoothly, producing a paper signed by a federal magistrate. "Signed and executed under Title III. You see, Harrison, we noticed a disturbing statistical anomaly in your sentencing records. Specifically, your absolute maximum sentencing of young minority men for minor, nonviolent misdemeanors." "I am tough on crime," Caldwell barked, sweat now beading on his forehead and dripping down his stark white hair. "That is my judicial prerogative. Discretion is built into the statute." "Discretion is," Corrington agreed, his voice icy. "Kickbacks, however, are not." The word dropped into the silent courtroom like a live grenade. Sarah Jenkins's jaw practically hit the floor. Desmond looked at his father in the gallery. Robert Hayes was leaning forward, his eyes burning with intense vindication. "Kickbacks?" Caldwell stammered, his facade completely shattering. "That is absurd. It's a lie." "Is it?" Agent Redding pressed a button on the digital recorder. The audio was crystal clear, completely devoid of static. "I don't care if they just jaywalked. Tom, slap a resisting charge on them. I need 3 more bodies in Oakhaven by the end of the month to hit the quota. Apex Consulting expects their dividend, and I expect my cut. These street kids are just inventory. Nobody is going to miss them anyway." The voice on the recording was undeniably Caldwell's. Redding paused the tape. "That was recorded last Tuesday, in your private chambers, during a conversation with the warden of Oak Haven Correctional Facility, a private, for-profit prison that just so happens to receive state subsidies per inmate. Subsidies that were subsequently funneled through a shell company called Apex Consulting straight into your offshore accounts in the Caymans. The silence that followed was absolute. The sheer magnitude of the corruption was breathtaking. It wasn't just racism. It was the weaponization of racism for profit. Caldwell had been monetizing the destruction of young lives, using his gavel as a cash register. It was a horrifying real-life echo of the infamous Mark Ciavarella Kids for Cash scandal in Pennsylvania, brought straight into Sullivan County. "You thought the air conditioning was broken in here this week?" Corrington asked, a grim smile playing on his lips. "It wasn't. The HVAC maintenance crew you authorized over the weekend were undercover federal technicians. They wired this entire room for sound and video. We heard everything, Harrison. Every disgusting, prejudiced word you just spat at Mr. Hayes. We have you on federal wiretap using racial slurs to justify a fraudulent conviction." Prosecutor Richard Blaine, realizing his entire career was standing on a trapdoor, panicked. "Your Honor, Chief Judge Corrington, I had absolutely no idea. I was just prosecuting the case based on the police report." Agent Redding turned her sharp gaze to Blaine. "We will be reviewing your entire conviction history as well, Mr. Blaine. But right now, we have another matter." She turned toward the witness stand. Officer Thomas Finch had gone completely pale. The smug, heavily muscled rookie who had strutted into the courtroom an hour ago was now trembling so violently his badges rattled. He looked toward the back doors, calculating the distance. But the two FBI agents had already shifted to block the exit. "Officer Finch," Redding said, her tone devoid of any sympathy. "Did you really think the FBI wouldn't investigate the arresting officers in a judicial kickback scheme?" Finch swallowed hard. I was just following orders. The judge, he talked to my captain. They said we needed to increase stops in the 4th Ward. They said to look for reasons. Any reason. Taillights. Loitering. Noise. And if they gave us any lip, make it a resisting charge." "You lying rat!" Caldwell screamed from the bench, abandoning all dignity. "You incompetent fool! Shut your mouth!" "He told us to target them!" Finch yelled back, terrified of the federal prison time suddenly looming over his head. "He gave us a quota. He said he'd make sure the convictions stuck if we brought him the arrests. He guaranteed it." "That's enough," Chief Judge Corrington commanded. He looked at Caldwell with an expression of profound disgust. "Harrison Caldwell, under the authority vested in me by the Supreme Court of this state, you are hereby stripped of your judicial authority. Effective immediately. You are ordered to step down from that bench." Caldwell didn't move. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire universe collapse. The untouchable king of courtroom 302 was suddenly a cornered, pathetic old man. "Step down, Harrison," Corrington repeated, his voice echoing in the rafters, "or the agents will drag you down." Slowly, with shaking hands, Caldwell stood up. He fumbled with the clasp of his black robes, the symbol of the justice he had so deeply perverted. He let the heavy fabric fall over the back of his expensive leather chair, revealing a sweat-stained dress shirt underneath. He walked down the wooden steps from the bench, his legs stiff and unsteady. As he reached the floor, the two FBI agents stepped forward. "Harrison Caldwell," one of the agents said, producing a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, federal civil rights violations under color of law, racketeering, and extortion." Click, click. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting closed around Caldwell's wrists was the loudest noise in the room. Desmond Hayes watched, his heart pounding in his chest. Less than 10 minutes ago, he had been staring down the barrel of a stolen year of his life, condemned by a man who saw him as nothing more than profitable inventory. Now, that same man was standing in the exact spot Desmond had been, wearing the same cold steel around his wrists. Karma had not just knocked, it had kicked the doors down. Agent Redding turned to Sarah Jenkins. "Miss Jenkins, on behalf of the Department of Justice, I apologize for what your client was subjected to today. The United States Attorney's Office is officially taking over this jurisdiction's active docket. She turned to Prosecutor Blaine, who looked like he might be physically sick. Mr. Blaine, do you have a motion you'd like to make regarding the state versus Desmond Hayes? Blaine practically tripped over his own feet, rushing to the podium. Yes, absolutely, Your Honor. I mean, Chief Judge Corrington, in light of everything. The state moves to immediately dismiss all charges against Desmond Hayes, with prejudice. Motion granted, Corrington said instantly. He looked directly at Desmond, his eyes softening for the first time since he entered the room. Mr. Hayes, you are a free man. Your record is completely clear. What happened to you in this building is a stain on our justice system, and we will spend years rectifying it. You are free to go. Desmond stood up. His legs felt like lead, but a profound lightness was spreading through his chest. He turned around to face the gallery. His father, Robert, had crossed the barrier and was standing there, tears streaming down his weathered face. Robert pulled his son into a fierce, crushing embrace. I told you, Robert whispered into Desmond's shoulder, his voice thick with emotion. I told you, the truth would hold. As Desmond hugged his father back, he watched as Judge Harrison Caldwell was perp-walked down the center aisle of his own courtroom, his head bowed, the federal agents gripping his arms. The powerful man who had treated the law as his personal playground was now just another criminal entering the system. But the reckoning was not over. As Caldwell was led out the door, the scope of the FBI's operation began to unfold in real time, preparing to tear down the rest of the corrupt empire he had built. The immediate aftermath of Harrison Caldwell's arrest was not a quiet resolution. It was a seismic shockwave that tore through the foundation of the Sullivan County justice system. Courtroom 302 was immediately sealed with bright yellow FBI crime scene tape. The local news vans arrived within 20 minutes, their satellite dishes extending into the hot afternoon sky as reporters scrambled to broadcast the unbelievable scene, a sitting Superior Court judge being loaded into the back of a black, armored federal SUV. Inside the courthouse, Special Agent Sarah Redding wasted no time. With Caldwell secured and en route to federal holding, she coordinated a synchronized raid on his private chambers, his sprawling estate in the affluent Oak Creek subdivision, and the offices of Apex Consulting, a shell corporation registered out of a strip mall in Delaware. In Caldwell's chambers, the illusion of judicial dignity was quickly stripped away. Behind a false panel in his heavy mahogany bookcase, agents discovered a fireproof safe. Inside were stacks of banded $100 bills, 3 Rolex watches, and, most damning of all, a handwritten ledger. Caldwell, blinded by arrogance, had meticulously documented the exact bounties paid out by Oak Haven Correctional Facility for every bed filled. Next to the initials of young, mostly minority men he had sentenced, were corresponding dollar amounts transferred through offshore accounts at Credit Suisse. Meanwhile, Prosecutor Richard Blaine and Officer Thomas Finch were placed in separate windowless interrogation rooms at the federal building downtown. Blaine, a man whose ambition was only matched by his cowardice, broke within the first hour. I didn't know about the money. I swear to God I didn't know about the offshore accounts, Blaine pleaded, sweating profusely, his expensive silk tie discarded on the metal table. Agent Redding sat across from him, her expression carved from stone. Ignorance of the kickbacks doesn't absolve you of the civil rights violations, Richard. You aggressively prosecuted cases you knew lacked probable cause. You turned a blind eye to Finch's impossible timelines. You were the legal hammer Caldwell used to drive the nails. We are looking at RICO charges. Blaine buried his face in his hands. What do you want? I'll give you whatever you want. I want a proffer agreement. I want the rest of the rot, Redding demanded, leaning forward. A judge and a rookie cop don't orchestrate a pipeline to a private prison on their own. Who else is on the Apex Consulting payroll? Blaine swallowed hard, deciding to burn the bridge to save himself. Captain John O'Malley, the precinct commander for the 4th Ward. He's the one who instituted the shadow quotas for the patrol units. And Arthur Sterling, the regional director of Oakhaven. They met at the country club every first Sunday of the month. Caldwell called it the Inventory Committee. The twist was sickening. It wasn't just a rogue judge. It was a fully operational, syndicated human trafficking ring operating under the color of law. By midnight, federal arrest warrants were executed for Captain O'Malley and Arthur Sterling. The entire chain of command in Sullivan County was decapitated in a single surgical strike by the Department of Justice. For Desmond Hayes, stepping out of the courthouse that afternoon felt like stepping onto a different planet. The suffocating heat of the day had finally broken, replaced by a cool, cleansing rain. His public defender, Sarah Jenkins, walked beside him, carrying her chaotic stack of files, though this time her steps were light and unburdened. "Desmond," Sarah said, stopping near the granite steps leading down to the street. "In all my years as a public defender, I have never seen anything like what just happened. You didn't just survive this. You brought the whole house of cards down. Because you refused to take a plea deal. Because you insisted on the truth." Desmond looked down at the street, watching the rain wash away the grime of the city. "It wasn't just me, Miss Jenkins. How many guys like me sat in that exact same chair, without a father in the gallery to support them, without an attorney willing to fight? How many of them are sitting in Oakhaven right now because of him?" "Too many," Sarah admitted softly. "But the DOJ is freezing Oakhaven's state contracts. Chief Judge Corrington is assigning a special master to review every single conviction Caldwell handed down in the last 5 years. There are going to be a lot of exonerations. A lot of young men are coming home." Desmond nodded, pulling his suit jacket tighter against the rain. The trauma of the last month, the terror of the traffic stop, and the indignity of Caldwell's racist tirade still burned in his chest. But the paralyzing fear was gone. In its place was a quiet, unbreakable resolve. 18 months later, the wheels of justice, real justice, finally ground to a halt for Harrison Caldwell. The venue had shifted from the municipal courthouse he once ruled to the austere, heavily guarded federal courthouse in the Southern District. The trial had been a media spectacle, a stark exposure of the deepest, darkest flaws of the penal system. The prosecution had laid out a mountain of irrefutable evidence: wiretaps, the seized ledger, bank records, and the devastating testimonies of Richard Blaine and Thomas Finch, both of whom had taken plea deals to testify against their former boss. Now, it was sentencing day. Caldwell sat at the defense table. The 18 months in federal detention had aged him 2 decades. His stark white hair had thinned to brittle wisps, and his tailored judicial robes had been replaced by a baggy, olive-green jumpsuit issued by the federal marshals. The arrogance that had once radiated from him was entirely extinguished, replaced by a hollow, terrified shell of a man. Presiding over the case was Federal District Judge Eleanor Thompson, a brilliant jurist with an uncompromising reputation. She looked down at Caldwell from the bench, her expression one of profound, unyielding disdain. "Before I hand down this sentence," Judge Thompson announced, her voice ringing clear across the packed courtroom, "the court recognizes the right of the victims to be heard. I call Mr. Desmond Hayes to the podium." Desmond stood up from the front row of the gallery. He was no longer the terrified college student in his only suit. He wore a sharp, midnight blue suit, his posture immaculate, radiating confidence. He walked past Caldwell without even granting him a glance, and stood at the podium, adjusting the microphone. "Your Honor," Desmond began, his voice steady and resonant. 18 months ago, the man sitting at that table looked down at me from a bench, just like yours. He called me a thug. He called me inventory. He looked at the color of my skin and decided that I was worth nothing more than a kickback from a private prison. He tried to take my future, my freedom, and my dignity, all to line his own pockets. The courtroom was deathly silent. Caldwell kept his eyes glued to the scuffed wooden table, unable to lift his head. "But he failed," Desmond continued. "I graduated with my degree in architectural design last month. I am currently working on a project to design a new, state-of-the-art community recreation center for the youth in the 4th Ward. the exact same youth he tried to systematically destroy. Harrison Caldwell thought he held all the power. He thought we were voiceless. But today, he is the one sitting in chains, and we are the ones rebuilding the community he tried to tear down. I don't ask for vengeance, Your Honor. I ask for exactly what he promised me, the absolute maximum allowed by statute. Desmond stepped down, walking back to his father, Robert, who squeezed his shoulder with immense pride. Judge Thompson nodded slowly, her eyes locking onto the broken former judge. Harrison Caldwell, Judge Thompson said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly cold register. You were entrusted with the most sacred duty in our civil society. You were supposed to be the blind scales of justice. Instead, you weaponized prejudice to run a human trafficking operation from the bench. You sold young men to a cage for profit. It is difficult for this court to fathom a more grotesque betrayal of the public trust. Caldwell began to weep quietly, his shoulders shaking. It was a pathetic sight, eliciting zero sympathy from the gallery. You stated on federal wiretap that you needed bodies to hit a quota, Judge Thompson continued, picking up her pen to sign the final order. Well, Mr. Caldwell, today you become a body in the system you so deeply corrupted. I am sentencing you to 25 years in federal prison to be served in a maximum security facility without the possibility of parole. You are remanded to the custody of the United States Marshals. The strike of Judge Thompson's gavel was sharp, decisive, and final. It was the sound of the universe correcting itself. The marshals immediately hoisted Caldwell to his feet. As he was led away, shuffling toward the holding cells, he finally looked up, his tear-filled eyes scanning the gallery. He saw Desmond Hayes standing tall, unbothered, and free. It was the last image of the outside world Caldwell would ever see as a free man, the face of the innocent man who had catalyzed his ultimate destruction. Outside the federal courthouse, the sun was shining brightly. Desmond took a deep breath of the crisp air. He had a meeting with the city planners in an hour to finalize the blueprints for the youth center. Justice had not just been served, it had been rewritten. The gavel had fallen, but this time it had struck true. If this story of ultimate karma and justice served gave you chills, make sure to hit that like button. Share this video to expose the hidden truths of the justice system, and subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life courtroom dramas where the corrupt finally get exactly what they deserve. Leave a comment below with your thoughts.